This video has been annotated for extra information density.
Of this video is space combat in Fantasy Flight Games, Star Wars, the role-playing game. A lot of people have asked for a video talking about combat in the game, and most of them have asked specifically about space combat. And if you're going around forums and looking at actual play, you can see that there are a lot of questions about it, even though it's not fundamentally different from how combat is handled in the rest of the game. So I find that interesting. I have a lot of space combat games, like tabletop war games and role-playing games that involve them. I really like the idea of playing a pilot. In fact, when we play, BattleTech, when we play MechWarrior, I'm the guy who wants to bring in aerospace, and when we're playing the role-playing game, I'm the one who wants to be the aerospace pilot rather than the mech jock. But not everyone has these interests, and not every system, when you read it, makes the kind of sense that the designer might hope. So let's talk about space combat. This game, and we'll talk about this more in the review that's coming, this game approaches play from two very distinct and very explicitly defined points of view. There's the narrative play and the structured play. In structured play, what you expect from the text is that you'll be getting very specific details about what to do. And maybe it's this shift which is causing people problems, or maybe it's the fact that, on the Game Master's screen, very little of the information that relates to starship combat is presented. There's enough to get by, but maybe not enough to get comfortable when you're learning the system. Because the game approaches itself from these two different points of view, and because you switch from the purely narrative down into the partially narrative, partially defined aspect of structured gameplay, there's cause for some discomfort or nervousness or uncertainty. So let's address that. Space combat is built on some very specific aspects or elements. These are range, silhouette, maneuvers, actions, and crew actions, critical hit results. These things define combat. Let's look at them piece by piece. Range is one of those things in the game which really straddles the line between the rules of structured gameplay and the narrative freedom of narrative gameplay in Star Wars. Something like short range is not defined in terms of meters, but in terms of what kind of relationship or interaction between characters is possible. And that's really interesting. That's really how, as early D&D players way back in the 80s, my group of friends and I, that's how we defined ranges anyway. I feel that this game is kind of tapping into the base instinct of the abstract gamer, the gamer who doesn't rely on a grid or a hex map for their role-playing game interactions. Right? So that you're not playing these two types of games that way. The whole game, the whole Star Wars role-playing game, remains on the abstract level. Just because you're having a space combat or just because you're having a shootout in a hallway doesn't mean you have to break out maps and miniatures. You certainly can. The game doesn't really offer you the kind of information you would need to support that. You'd have to import some kind of miniatures rules in order to do that. However, some games, like BattleTech's role-playing game, they do provide you with the information you need to seamlessly merge the miniatures rules with the role-playing rules, if that's what's required for your scene. But this game's combat is expecting that everything will remain on an abstract and purely spoken level. So phrasing range, not in terms of meters, but in terms of how characters can interact with each other or not interact with each other at that range, is excellent. This really speeds up the process of narration and interpretation. Are they close enough to interact in this way, or are they too far away to interact in this way? And which makes it really easy to do that. In terms of space combat, the ranges are close, which matches up with engaged in ground-based combat. So close, short, medium, long, and extreme. And part of the narrative elements that go into this are close range. This is engaged. This is where starfighters like X-Wings and TIE fighters, where they mix it up. That's their sphere of influence. Now, because this is a space combat, we have the potential for 3D interactions. If the game were to try and take the tack of providing you with a lot of heavy detail about facings and turning and inertia and all that stuff, it would not be the same game. It just wouldn't. It would be another game, and there are lots of those games out there. Try them. They're cool. I love them. But in this game, we're trying to capture the feel of Star Wars combat. In this particular video, Star Wars space combat. So the onus is actually placed on the players to take the tools of the space combat system and turn that into awesome gameplay. Simply saying, I will apply the stay on target maneuver, roll dice, is not going to give you an exciting combat. It just isn't. And it doesn't matter what kind of PC and NPC rivalry is going on in that scene. Right? Yes, you're applying the system attached to the stay on target maneuver to this scene. However, what your character is actually doing is madly jockeying for position, right, as their target is jinking to the side, but you're trying your best to keep it locked on there so that you can get a good target lock with your missile and blow it to Kingdom Come. That's exciting. That's not, yes, I will aim, right? Describe it. Bring it to life. That's why we are here. That's what makes these games exciting. And in fact, we could look at not doing that in this game as a player error, right? Of not going through the process of the combat properly. So, once we've dealt with ranges, then we have to start thinking in terms of how do maneuvers interact with range, and how do maneuvers set us up for actions? We can see this in film. We can see how the pilots are jockeying for position. We can see how they're arrowing in on a target, and then we get into firing or not firing. So as we mentioned, the close range, this is engaged. This is where dogfights happen. This is the small, tight sphere of influence where the TIE fighters and the X-Wings and the Y-Wings are all whipping around each other and trying to blow each other to dust. Outside of that arc is the sphere of influence of medium range, and this is where the big ships play. Right? This is where the capital ships hang. They're in the ideal spot to hammer at each other. They're still in what would be visual range, and the starfighters are duking it out. They're dogfighting in between them. Long range, this is the strategic level, not the tactical level. This is the strategic level, as is extreme range, of are we going to involve any terrain in this? Are we going to move this near an asteroid belt? Are we going to be doing it around a moon? Are we going to be out in open space? Are we going to be near the system's jump point or not? Is there, space stations or other kind of system defense emplacements? That's what long range is for. It's quite possible for some weapons to be exchanging shots. Even at extreme range, you might find that. But really, this is the setup or the escape scene, right? As they move into medium range or as they flee. There's a lot of game here in these very few pages of space mechanics. So visual references are great. I mean, I play a lot of war and skirmish games for that very reason. I like miniatures and models, and I find they can really spark the imagination. And when you look at this X-Wing model of the Millennium Falcon, it's hard not to get excited. Even the tiny models of the TIE fighters are so detailed and so cool that you just want to play Star Wars. In a role-playing game, This can slow things down a lot, or it can focus on minutiae that take us away from character and away from drama, away from the cinema of the thing, and can, note I'm saying can, not do, and they can detract from that role-playing experience for some of the people present. For others, it will be a very immersive and exciting experience. But when we're talking about space combat, one of the areas where abstraction can ease things along is, as I've been saying, in the freedom it gives to do your narration. What you end up with is no map. You have an imagined space, and this brings with it its own set of problems, obviously, like people having a difficult time imagining what's around them, or the relationship in distance or time it takes to travel between different things. And so the way this has been abstracted in Fantasy Flight Games, Star Wars role-playing game, is with the range bands, the partially structured and partially narrative range bands. And how the problems are circumvented so you can simply narrate what's going on is to have a point cost for changing range. If at the beginning of the encounter it is stated that ties are closing and they are at extreme range, they have a point cost to close from extreme to long. They have a point cost to pay to close from long to medium, and medium to short, and short to close. And there's nothing in the mechanics that talks about the relative facings or directions or, angle of attack. That's all narrative. All we know is they're too far apart to interact in any other way than to try to close range as the attacker or open range as the attacked. Changes of range are governed by speed. You can find this information on page 245 in the Maneuvers section, right there in the top corner just before Evasive Maneuvers. These are the speed relationships, and this is all described in the flyer drive maneuver. If we look at the stat line of the standard TIE Fighter, we see this is a ship that is silhouette 3. It has a speed of 5 and handling of 3. Comparing that to the YT-1300, we have a silhouette of 4, speed of 3, handling of -1. While the freighter is obviously beefier than the TIE Fighter, in many ways it's outclassed. The tiny little TIE Fighter is significantly faster and handles much better. The stock version of the freighter is armed the same way that the TIE Fighter is, but here's where the advantage of the freighter comes in. It has a dorsal and a ventral turret-mounted 360-degree firing arc. No matter where the TIEs choose to attack from, they can receive incoming fire. If the freighter captain can somehow get behind the TIE, he can fire without reprisal. He'll have to outmaneuver the TIEs because he can't outrun them. There are talents that allow good pilots to increase the top speed of their vessel. So if this captain were in possession of that, his YT-1300 freighter could get up to speed 4, but still the TIE is speed 5. And let's talk about these relationships. At speed 1, as I said earlier, it takes 1 starship maneuver to move within close range of a target, or 2 starship maneuvers to move from close to short range, or from short range to close range. In other words, if he wants to engage in combat using his close-ranged weapons, it costs 1 maneuver if they're already at close range. If they're at short range, it will cost 2 starship maneuvers to get into close range, and then it will cost a maneuver to engage. Likewise, if engaged and seeking to escape, it's going to cost 2 starship maneuvers to extend the range from close to short. As speed increases, the expenditure of those starship maneuvers has a greater and greater effect. So at the freighter's top speed of 3 or 4, if the pilot is talented in the right way, it costs 1 starship maneuver to engage, to close, or if you spend 1 maneuver, you can go from close to short range or from short to close range, or 2 starship maneuvers to move from close to medium or medium to close. Where this gets bad for the freighter pilot is that the TIE fighter is in a different speed category. It's in the speed 5 to 6 range, meaning it's 1 starship maneuver to move within close range, to engage. But if they want to go from close to medium or from medium to close, that's 1 maneuver. If they want to go from long to close, it's 2 maneuvers. It's always 2 maneuvers to go from extreme to long. So if, in our scenario, the ships were separated by extreme range, it's 1 turn, 2 maneuvers to go to long. Second turn, 2 maneuvers to get to close. Third turn, 1 maneuver to engage. And you still have the option of having 1 maneuver left to do something fancy. Whether that extra maneuver comes from taking strain or from sacrificing an attack action, you can see how the TIE fighters have the advantage and should be causing fear in the freighter captain. In a way, you can think about range as a condition. You're paying a certain point cost in maneuvers in order to change the condition between too far away to attack or close enough to attack. Range is not really going to have a significant effect on how you're resolving the game, except whether or not, ships can interact with each other. It's not going to be a factor in the difficulty to hit, for example. That's determined differently, and we'll get to that later on in this clip. So once range is established and we know which ships can interact with each other, then they have to interact with each other, and this is where the description starts to heat up. What maneuvers are they taking? The maneuvers are a list, and for good gameplay, the players involved should really know what the maneuvers are. They should know what their options are. They should know them well, because they're going to have to interpret them, not just apply them as a label. I aim, right? I stay on target. They're going to have to do stuff. They're going to have to describe it. They're going to have to make it cool. They're going to have to inspire the people across the table to get into it. So they need to know what they are. They are things like accelerate, decelerate, which doesn't sound very dramatic, does it? Stay on target, fly. But all of these things are the basis for interactions. Now, let's look at something like gain the advantage. What this allows is dogfighting. Gain the advantage. The ships fly into each other. We're narrating how they're closing the distance. And this can be really scary in Star Wars. The freighter that my players use in my face-to-face game, it is not as fast as a TIE interceptor. And often when they go on missions, they leave their ship behind and they wind up in some junker that's even worse, which is even slower. And you can imagine an interceptor ripping in with its speed of 6, meaning it can go from, long range to close range, like that. They come ripping in, and you're just trying to get away, right? And it feels like there's no way. That claustrophobic, I can't get away from my opponent. What am I going to do? Well, if I can't outrun them, I can outfly them. This is where things like gain the advantage or evasive maneuvers come in. So these maneuvers are essential for what's going on. Yeah, they will give you a certain bonus or a certain effect or apply a certain condition in gameplay. This is the structured gameplay at work. But it's the narration which makes them real. So gain the advantage. The whole purpose of that is that it's no longer the target which is determining their attitude toward your ship through their narration. When you have the advantage, you're dictating which arc your fire is raining down on that vessel, which is cool. And people inside the ship will be scrambling in response to your attack. This is the essence of the drama of space combat, all of the interactions. Evasive maneuvers, likewise, this is giving you some kind of practical defensive bonus against the enemy. All of these things come with little perks or tweaks, like if you are aiming, if you're staying on target, if you're zooming in on, let's say you're racing across the surface of a Star Destroyer and you want to take out one of its turbo laser batteries, and you're zipping across its surface, you're closing in to get into short range because this ship is just so massive, you are much easier to hit by the TIE fighters on your tail because you can't just fly freely. You can't maneuver freely in three-dimensional space. You have to hone in on your target. Yes, you want the mechanical bonus to stay on target, but you also have to take the risk of the mechanical penalty applied to being hit by your pursuers. All very cool stuff. And building on that in terms of the narration and interpretation, the teasing each other, the desperate looks across the table, that's where the fun comes from. If we say that these two TIE fighters are at long range, right, nobody can shoot at each other because they're both outfitted with weapons that have a range restriction of close. He wants to get away, so he moves up to top speed. That's, let's say for ease, that's speed 3. So it's moving at top speed. If they spend 2 maneuvers and he spends 2 maneuvers to run, what will happen? Let's say the TIEs have initiative. They're going to act first. They spend their 2 maneuvers. They can go from long to close. Now, I don't represent this by actually moving them closer to the model. I note, in my head or on a piece of paper if necessary, that they are now at close range. They have paid to get into close range. They're not engaged, right? But they're in close range. Now, freighter captain's turn. He spends 2 maneuvers. He can stretch out close to medium. Now they're at medium range. The TIEs don't have a shot. All kinds of activities been going on inside. They're, dealing with shields. They're using sensors. They're doing what they can to get ready. We cycle through to the next turn. The TIEs can get into close range with 1 maneuver. Pilots could take strain to use their second maneuver to engage the target. This still leaves them with an action with which to attack. In the freighter, the co-pilot might be angling the deflector shields. The pilot might have now to decide just to run for it, trying to open range up again, but he knows that they can close the range now anytime they want. Or he can go for evasive maneuvers. He's traveling at the right speed for evasive maneuvers, so maybe that's the best bet. It really would depend on the situation or scenario that we are in. If they absolutely have to get away, then going for the range and hoping that the superior durability and superior shielding of the freighter will save the day. However, they might want to turn and fight. Unless one side has used the action, gained the advantage over the other, then it's the target that decides where incoming fire hits. You're choosing the arc that the enemy is firing on. So because they don't have advantage, they're just, firing at the target, then your maneuvers are determining, where that fire comes in. It's very simple. If they do have the advantage, they are deciding. This becomes significant against ships which have lost a shield generator or have weaker shielding in one area than another. They might be able to strike a blow and not have to go through your shields. Well, then we get into actions like, opposed piloting rolls or piloting rolls to deal with terrain. If you're not out in open space, if there's terrain of some kind involved, then your relative speeds still don't really matter in terms of interacting with each other, but they do matter in terms of you interacting with your environment. So, you look at the silhouette of your ship. How big is your ship? And you look at your speed. And just like building a die pool for an ability check where you're drawing different colored dice from different sources, you will take half your silhouette and your speed and combine them together. So whichever one's larger forms the number of dice in the pool, and the other one will affect the difficulty. So your difficulty is built like this. Let's say you're in a silhouette 4 craft. Half of that is 2. And let's say you're traveling at speed 3. So speed 3 is larger. So you're rolling 3 dice, 2 of which get upgraded to reds. That's your difficulty, because you're moving that fast in this ship through obstacles. If you're just out in open space, you do not have this difficulty. Right? If you're moving through terrain, you have that difficulty. So that's hugging the surface of a Star Destroyer, hugging the surface of a planet, flying between mountain ranges, going through an asteroid belt, through a dust cloud, something like that. Flying through a cloud of oncoming TIE fighters. All of these things would apply that difficulty based on your speed and size. This has an effect on your piloting maneuvers in combat. Where is that combat taking place? Now, just a note on speed, as we talked about earlier, the freighter here will find itself in one speed category. That's speed 2 to 4. And its maneuvering ability, its ability to open and close range, its ability to engage targets will be dependent on that. The TIEs are in a higher category, speed 5 to 6, and they can close and engage much more easily. What if, in the fiction, ships which are in the game's speed category of 5, 6 are different speeds? And what I'm thinking about here is the TIE Interceptor at speed 6 and the A-Wing at speed 6. In the game mechanics, they're the same speed. Narratively, they're not. In terms of what those ships can accomplish in terms of closing range, changing range, being able to engage, they are similar enough to be handled the same way. This doesn't mean you need to narrate that the Interceptor and the A-Wing are the same speed. Right? And if you find that you have a scene where they are dueling, then you, as the game master, can consider giving things like boost dice or setback dice for maneuvers that specifically test the speed against the speed. So reading about the ship, learning its history, its design, and whatnot, all of these things which are included in the game fiction, that's just as much a part of this as which maneuver to select and which attack action to take. The relative interactions between the ship can also play a role. Do you have the advantage, or does the enemy have advantage over you? Are you doing something like trying to focus on a particular target? Are you trying to get away? Are you trying to jump to another speed, and so on? How much strain is the ship taking? Then we get to the actual combat interactions. And firing is pretty easy. It's based on relative sizes, not on ranges, because range is really a can you or can't you proposition. Right? The size of the ship is what matters. Size matters. The smaller ship will get an easier difficulty to hit a larger target. And likewise, the larger target gets a harder difficulty to hit the smaller target. So if two ships are the same size, the difficulty is 2 if they're in range of each other. If the firing ship is 2 silhouettes smaller, the difficulty becomes 1. If the firing ship is 2 silhouettes larger, this becomes hard. This is a difficulty 3. If it's 3, it becomes 4. If it's 4, it becomes 5. Right. So the most massive Star Destroyers or space station firing on an X-Wing, is looking at difficulty 5 to hit it. Let's take a look at the things which are specifically actions and the things which are specifically maneuvers. Because we're talking so much about combat with capital ships and things, let's draw those examples from the big red book, Age of Rebellion. Space combat is in the 200s in the pages. So we get into starships and vehicles on page 235. And as we go through the definitions of things, we get into protection, and then starship and vehicle combat, and then once those basics of understanding range and interactions are listed, then the first thing presented to us are maneuvers on 245 in terms of what can we do once we are in space and trying to kill each other. So maneuvers are accelerate and decelerate, fly drive, evasive maneuvers, stay on target, punch it, and angle the deflector shields. Okay? And we have pilot only. What size ship can undertake these things, like silhouette 1 to 4 for stay on target? Pilot only. Yes, it's the pilot who can do this maneuver. And speed, there's a minimum speed at which this needs to be maintained, or at which this can be attempted. So for stay on target, it's a pilot only maneuver. Any ship from silhouette 1 to 4 can undertake it, and speed has to be 3+. Right, so the description given is this reflects a pilot's concentration and his ability to shut combat-related stresses and distractions, to shut them out to make sure a target is hit or an adversary is destroyed. They're focusing in on one particular target. That's the essence of stay on target. Okay, and it goes on to describe what the mechanical effects and advantages and disadvantages of that are. But as the player, you get into the headspace of what is it that I'm trying to do. As the game master, you look at and you interpret their description and say, okay, well, they're trying to stay on target, and that's how that works, how that interaction works. Then we get into specific actions. So these are things like the blanket barrage, a firing action, concentrated barrage, damage control, gain the advantage, which we've talked about so much. And then there's the catch-all, additional ship and vehicle actions, which is there for, the designers don't really know what kind of ship might be involved in your game, how big or small it might be, what kind of stuff you might decide to stick in there. So the additional ship and vehicle actions, they do provide you a chart, though. Chart 7.4, it's on page 248, and it's things like plot a course, serve as a co-pilot, jam a signal, boost the shields, conduct repairs, fire discipline, scan the enemy, slice the enemy's systems, spoof incoming missiles. And these serve as examples. So with the associated skills and the associated assigned difficulties and the types of results you can expect from those types of actions, you can cover an awful lot of interaction in space combat, and you can certainly then use this as a building block to determine a good ruling for whatever it is that actually it's attempted. Continuing on with the actions, we have overwhelming barrage. Barrage is a very favorite thing, and we can imagine applying these to capital ships and ships of the line. Then there's perform a combat check. This is an action, and that's the list of possible actions. So in terms of a dogfight, what would we really be looking at? From the maneuvers, we would have changing speed. This would be important. We would have fly. We would have evasive maneuvers. We would have stay on target, potentially. We might have punch it for an escape route or a sudden attack. And we would have angle the deflector shields. All of these would be coming into play for a dogfight. Fly contains within its text on page 245 the speeds. Speed 0, no movement. Speed 1, speed 2 to 4, speed 5 to 6. And here is where you'll find the information of how many maneuvers are required to change range. It would be nice if something like this were on the Game Master's screen. It's not. having a note available until you've got it memorized, and it's pretty easy to memorize, is probably a good idea for the game master at least, and certainly for the pilot. Speed 0, your ship is not moving. You can't perform any other maneuvers except to stop moving speed 0. Speed 1. At speed 1, it requires 2 starship maneuvers to move from close range to short range, or from short range to close range. So you're moving very slowly. If both ships are in short range and you want to engage them, or if you're trying to disengage, it's going to cost you 2 maneuvers to do that. Speed 2 to 4, it costs 1 starship maneuver to get, to close, or to move from close to short, or from short to close, is 1 maneuver. And it costs 2 maneuvers to go from close to medium, or medium to close. Okay. Then speeds 5 to 6, these are the really scary speeds, the interceptors, the A-wings. 1 starship maneuver to close, of course. Then, to move from close to medium, or from medium to close, 1. Or 2 starship maneuvers to move from close to long, or long to close. So even before you're really sure your sensors detect them, moving speed 6, the cost of 2 maneuvers, that's their regular maneuver plus 1 gained from strain, or 1 gained from a droid co-pilot or assistant, they are suddenly engaged with you. From long range, you can't see them, you can't hit them, bam, suddenly they are in close range. And those are maneuvers. Next comes an action. Scary stuff. So those high-speed ships can be terrifying, and the only result is to try and outmaneuver them. How do you do that? Evasive maneuvers, right? And the evasive maneuvers reflect a pilot's efforts to avoid incoming fire. Okay? So whatever those things are, that's evasive maneuvers, and there's a description of how to provide bonuses or benefits for those maneuvers as a result. Conducting evasive maneuvers makes it harder for your gunners to hit, as you would expect. So there's interplay in all things, and you can imagine the characters being able to scream at each other in character. The players scream at each other is like, well, I need to be able to hit. Well, I need to be able to get away. Which is better, not being hit or being able to apply damage to the target? It's good stuff for interaction there. The actions, in terms of dogfighting, damage control may come up. Gain the advantage will come up a lot. And there's the speed advantage difficulty chart, which should be noted. This is on page 247 in Age of Rebellion. For example, the initiating ship is traveling at the same speed as the target ship. Difficulty to gain the advantage will be average. But if the initiating ship speed is 2 or more lower than the target ship, in order to gain the advantage will be daunting. Right, so that faster interceptor trying to tag a YT-1300, it's going to be very difficult for the pilot of the YT-1300. In fact, it's going to be of daunting difficulty for the freighter pilot to gain the advantage over the interceptor pilot. The other ship is just too fast. The thing that determines the difficulty of 2 ships firing on each other is silhouette. This is a comparison. So the smaller ship will have the advantage. It will have an easier time to hit the larger ship. The larger ship will have a harder time to hit the smaller ship. And the way this is expressed is 2 ships with the same silhouette have the average difficulty. They have difficulty of 2. So 2 purple dice applied as the difficulty for that exchange. If the firing ship is 2 silhouettes smaller, then this difficulty drops to 1. It doesn't drop any lower than that. If the firing ship is 2 silhouettes larger, the difficulty rises to 3, becomes hard. 1 more goes to 4, 1 more and goes to 5. So a formidable difficulty to hit. This will have significant effect on can they hit at all, and will also serve to decrease the amount of damage that's done, as this very small and nimble ship tries to evade the guns that are designed for attacking planetary targets, that are designed for attacking space stations and other massive Star Destroyers and the like. So all this makes sense. Should they hit, and if things like breach are applied, then that small ship is going to be in very significant trouble. But it leaves you enough narrative room to say that that the blast has not direct hits, but a direct hit is still quite possible to destroy an awful lot of the small vessels in the game with a single hit. So that's kind of cool. Going the other way, you can't do a critical to a capital ship to a large ship unless you have done more damage than its armor value. And even then, some of them have a trait that is called massive. Might be massive 1, massive 2. It's like an item quality. It works the same way. So the sense of scale is dealt with very, very quickly and easily. So the difficulties that are involved in space combat come from maneuvering through obstacles, or come from differences in size. So when determining firing, it's the size of the target versus the size of the firer that matters. And when determining piloting difficulties and maneuvering difficulties, it's what's around them. Is it open space, or is it something else? In which case, it's taking the silhouette and the speed and using that to build the pool of difficulty. So, and that really covers all the mechanics of space combat. There are more things like planetary bombardments and how they affect ground troops and firing your X-wing weapons on a charging bounty hunter and things like that. But that's not really within the scope of this video, which I'm sure is already impossibly long. So let's do a quick recap and then get out. Space combat is governed by range. It doesn't attempt to provide you with rules or representations for 3D interactions in space. It's only concerning itself with the distance between the objects that are interacting and giving you a yes or no about whether or not that interaction can take place. Space combat is narrated through the use of applying maneuvers and actions. Some of these actions are pilot only. Some of them can be done by the crew. Some of them can be done by anybody. So maneuvers and actions are, of course, the bulk of what makes it up, but they're not to be applied in a vanilla fashion. They are to be interpreted, and the full depth of space combat is to be woven with your words, descriptions, and interactions. The effect of combat, this is really assigning difficulties to piloting checks and assigning difficulties to the ranged combat checks. There are all kinds of interesting item qualities or weapon qualities that come into play here. Things like breach, things like blast, things like concussion, guided. There's just so much stuff, and the first time that my play group was involved in a skirmish where a guided concussion missile was launched against them, the looks on their face were priceless. Fortunately, they outmaneuvered the missile and everything was fine. But that could have been a very, very deadly encounter, very likely to have crippled the ship and taken us in a very wild direction. So, space combats are tense. These are something that not all groups are willing or interested in risking, because destruction of the ship in space can mean the destruction of the entire group. Do they get to escape pods or not? Will the enemy track down the escape pods? What kind of scene is going on? Are they trying to be captured? Are they trying to be killed? Starfighter pilot, there's no escape pod. The death of your ship is pretty much the death of you. But again, this is Star Wars. Go with the adventure. Go with the action. Find the thrill in it and bring it out in the way that you tell that story around the table. I hope this look at space combat, this quick overview of space combat, has been helpful. If you want to talk more about space combat, leave a comment. Let's start a discussion.